Here we are in the Selway Bitterroot wilderness. This is a pretty big and very remote mountain range right on the border of Montana and Idaho. You'll find plenty of solitude on this route, and you'll find a lot of really challenging trail conditions too. Because it is so remote, a lot of these trails haven't been maintained in a while, and there's a lot of burn areas too, which have destroyed a lot of parts of the trail. So you'll definitely be doing some bushwhacking. This is a pretty challenging hike just because of the trail conditions, and the solitude makes it really feel like you're out there on your own, so you'll have a pretty adventurous hike for this one. We hiked this in mid to late June, which ended up being way too early, and there's still a lot of snow on the route that we planned, so we ended up having to do some alternate routes and some lower elevation trails because some of the higher peaks and ridgelines still had a lot of snow up on them. But I'll be explaining the ideal route for this roughly 80-mile hike, and that's for a better window of like mid-July to early September. Then you won't have to be dealing with as much snow. So as I go through and describe the route here, I would suggest that you go to my website, where you can find the link in the description of this video, and there's a lot more information about the route there. You can find day-by-day descriptions and statistics on the route, and there's also an interactive map that you can follow along, so you can see trail names and stuff like that, and you'll get a little bit more information about the route as I describe it. I also have a separate video that just shows the scenery from this hike. So it doesn't really matter which direction you do this. You can go southbound or northbound, doesn't really matter. We did it starting down here at Lake Como, going northbound, and then finishing up at the Big Creek trailhead up here. Both of these trailheads are pretty popular, and you shouldn't have any problem getting back on these dirt roads with any kind of car. This starting point down here at Lake Como is especially a popular area. There's a campground here and a swimming beach, and there's usually a lot of people hanging out here. Once you get a day into this route, the crowds are going to disappear and you're going to be pretty much on your own. So starting here at Lake Como, this is a nice trail all the way along the reservoir here. And then up at the west end of the lake here, there's a really cool waterfall. This is where Rock Creek flows into the reservoir. So up here can be a cool place to hang out. Then you've got a long and pretty gradual climb up this valley. You'll be in the forest most of the time. Trail conditions here are still pretty good. Once you get to Elk Lake, there's a few campsites to choose from if you want to stay there. From Lake Como to Elk Lake is about 10.8 miles. And then it seems like a majority of the crowds turn around after they get to Elk Lake, because after that the trail gets a little bit harder to follow. It's still not too bad, and you can make your way up to the pass here by Bel Lake. And Bel Lake is another really cool place to camp. There's not as many campsites to choose from, but we found a place right here on this little peninsula, and that was pretty nice. From Lake Como all the way to Bel Lake is about 13.5 miles. Right up here by Bel Lake, this is also where you're going to encounter your first burn area. You can see it starts right about here, and this whole area burned. Originally I had the route following the trail going down here, and on the maps there is a trail that goes down this valley, and then it connects to another trail that would come up this other valley. But when we went through here, the trail right around Bel Lake has totally disappeared. The fire was so bad it just destroyed the trail entirely. And then once we got down into these trees, it looks like whatever traces of trail there used to be hasn't been maintained in like over a decade. We could pick up very faint traces of a trail every once in a while, but it was basically gone, and the bushwhacking in here was really thick and really slow, and it was just super frustrating trying to fight through all this. Once I realized that's how it was going to be for the next like 3 miles through this whole valley, decided it wasn't worth it to even try and continue on this route because there was no trail. So we actually climbed up and over this ridge. So we went up the ridge and then down the other side to meet up with the Spruce Creek trail here. And there is a trail here, so we were able to follow that. But Long story short, I would not recommend that anybody try this because it was not fun. It was a lot of work and it was really slow going. So to make up for that, I'm having the route go up to the ridge here. So since you're already up on the pass, you won't have as much elevation gain to gain the ridge from Bel Lake. There's not going to be any trail here, so you're completely off trail. You're going to be walking on some loose scree, and then you're kind of on your own up on this ridge. This bushwhack from Bel Lake to the Spruce Creek Trail is about 3 miles, but I would count on going less than a mile an hour during this part, so allow plenty of time for that. It can be kind of dangerous and it'll be very slow going, so take your time in here. But basically from the pass, right above Bel Lake, just head left or straight north to go up this ridge, and kind of pick the best way up through the scree. And just keep in mind that once you get up to the ridge, you're going to be going right. So you'll kind of want to work your way to the right and whatever the easiest route looks like. Then once you're up on the ridge, just follow it until you get to a steeper hill going up to this unnamed peak. So when the ridge starts to incline kind of dramatically, that's when you know it's time to leave the ridge. And there should be kind of a scree path that you can follow just below this peak. It'll be a little bit easier to walk on the scree instead of being in the forest here. So try and follow this open scree field just below this peak and follow it until you get to this drainage here. That'll be just below these 2 lakes. From this route you probably won't be able to see the 2 lakes, so you won't be able to use those as landmarks, but once you see that you're in the middle of this drainage, then you know it's time to go down. And there's still no trail here. You'll be completely off trail and bushwhacking until you get to the Spruce Creek Trail, which runs up this valley. So once you reach the middle of the drainage here, just pick your way down and kind of bend to the right or to the north. You'll be trying to go through these kind of sparsely forested areas. Don't follow the drainage directly because that'll be more forested. Once you're down in the valley, you'll have to cross the Spruce Creek before you can find the trail on the other side of the river. And then once you meet up with the Spruce Creek Trail, everything will be much simpler. This trail is fairly well maintained, so it's nice and easy to follow. You can follow that up to Spruce Lake, which is another good place to camp. And then from Spruce Lake, you have a little bit of a climb up to this pass. It's not too bad. I think it's about 600 feet. You'll have some good views from up there. And continue down the trail to the Bear Creek Pass Campground, which is right here. And this is where you're going to meet up with the dirt road. This is a national forest campground. They have pay sites there, so it's a nice campground, but you don't have to pay for camping on this hike if you don't want to. You can keep going. You'll be following this dirt road, which is Road 429, and then at this fork in the road, take a left onto Road 5605, and that's the Twin Lakes Road. And you'll follow that up to the Twin Lakes. There's another national forest paid campground here. But if you don't want to pay for camping, you can keep going up to the Upper Twin Lake, and you can find some campsites around here. That whole road walking section is about 3 miles. From Upper Twin Lake, you have another climb up to Wahoo Pass. And from here, you'll have some really cool views. Now you're on the Lost Horse Trail, and it's going to be another long walk down this entire valley. You'll be in the forest most of the time, but you'll be following the creek and get some good views of that. And once you get down here, you'll find some campsites along the creek too. From Wahoo Pass to this junction is about 5 miles, and this is the junction with the Cox Creek Big Creek Trail. And this is one of the spots that we had to do a reroute because there was too much snow. So my original plan was to keep hiking on the Lost Horse Trail and go up to Wahoo Peak up here, and then from there you'd have a cool ridge walk all the way along the ridge here. But when we were there in mid to late June, there was too much snow, so we had to choose a lower elevation route and continue up this valley. The main route from this intersection to this intersection is about 6 miles, And the alternate route going up to Wahoo Peak and hiking along the ridge is just over 12 miles. So that'll add some time onto your hike if you want to do the alternate, but you'll have much better views. So to stay on the main route, you'll take a right or go north at this junction with the Cox Creek, Big Creek trailhead and follow it up the valley. And then up here, as you climb over this pass, you'll enter another burn area. And coming down from this pass, the trail pretty much disappears again. The burn has pretty much destroyed the trail. Continue to follow the main drainage past this pass, and keep an eye on this ridgeline to your right, which is to the east. And when it dips into a kind of well-defined saddle here, this is where the Chute Creek trail comes in from the east. We won't be taking this route, but this is kind of a good landmark to get your bearings and figure out where you are. If you're looking for a campsite in this area, once you see this saddle to your right, you can go left to the west. And there is a trail here called Battle Creek Crossing. This has probably been pretty well destroyed by the fire too, but it looks like there are bits and pieces of it that you can pick up. You can take that, go uphill a little bit, and when you see this big peak on your left, then you know it's time to leave the Battle Creek Crossing Trail, go left or south, and head uphill where you'll find Bel Lake, and this would be a good place to camp. So now I'll go back and explain the alternate route. If the weather looks good and there's no snow up here, this is definitely going to be worth the extra few miles. So stay on the Lost Horse Trail at this junction and head uphill. Eventually you'll be taking a right on the Battle Ridge Trail, which is going to take you up to Wahoo Peak. I didn't do this route, so this is untested, but I'm sure you're going to have incredible views up here. And it looks like parts of this route have been burned too, so just kind of be aware of that some parts of it might be hard to follow. But after Wahoo Peak, you'll be staying on the Battle Ridge Trail. Even if you can't see the trail, it should be pretty easy to navigate here just because you're going to be following the ridge the whole way. So continue on the ridge. You'll find Park Lake down to your right. Keep going along the ridge. And then in here, this is definitely another burn area. I don't know if the trail is easy to follow here or not, but just from the satellite view, it looks like there's not much tread left on the ground. But you can keep following the ridge, just keep it on your right, and basically go as far north as you can on this hill plateau area without going downhill. And once you kind of hit a dead end and you can't go any farther north without going downhill, then you know it's time to leave this ridge and go downhill into this valley where Battle Creek flows. Down here you'll pick up the Battle Creek Crossing Trail. This all looks like it's still well forested and like it hasn't been burned, so you should be able to pick up a trail in here. Looks like this is where some of the burn area starts again. If you are looking to camp around here, you can basically know that when the forest ends and you enter a burn area, then it's time to go south and head uphill, and then you'll make it to Battle Lake, which will be a good place to camp. Otherwise you can continue going, go downhill into this next drainage, and you'll meet up with the main route. So here, this is another unburned forested area where you're going to find an actually very nice trail. You can see what the trail used to look like before this whole place burned, but don't get used to it because pretty soon you'll be out of the unburned forest and back into a burn area. In here you'll be able to follow the trail, but it can be tricky. It can be pretty easy to lose the trail and just keep going, but I think in this area it's worth it to take your time and backtrack if you get off the trail. Just backtrack until you find the part of the trail that you were on and take your time to figure out where it goes. I think it'll be a little bit faster to try and stay on the trail in here, even if you have to backtrack a little bit. You'll continue it down this whole drainage, and then eventually the trail is going to go abruptly downhill, and this is a pretty big descent. Here the trail is hard to follow too, but for a different reason. The vegetation has come back with a vengeance after this area burned, and the trail is very overgrown here. There are parts of it that can be hard to follow, but definitely take your time trying to follow the trail through here, because that'll be much faster than trying to bushwhack straight downhill. And from the junction with the Cox Creek Trail to Moose Creek down here is about 10 miles. This is a pretty decent sized river. When we crossed it in mid to late June, it was about thigh deep, maybe waist deep at the deepest, and it was moving pretty fast. If you're doing this hike later in the year, it shouldn't be that bad, but just know that you'll have a decent sized river ford here. After crossing the creek, you'll pick up the Little Dead Elk Trail, and this area hasn't been burned really, so it should be a little bit easier to follow this trail. You'll follow it uphill, up into this drainage. Then after a while, the trail is going to go abruptly left or north and just switch back straight uphill. You'll reach this unnamed pass here, which is a cool place to camp. Just make sure you fill up on water before you get there if you want to camp here. Otherwise, you can keep going, and there's a spring in this area somewhere. And from here, you're going to have perfect trail all the way to the junction with the Big Sand Lake Trail. After having so much burn area and roughly maintained trail, this is going to feel really nice. So when you get to the junction with Big Sand Lake Trail, you'll take a right and head to the Big Sand Lake. And on the west end of the lake here, there's a little side trail going to a really nice campsite in this area. But the main route will continue along the lake here, and then you're going to take a left on the Frog Peak Trail, and this is a pretty big climb. And there is almost no shelter in here, so if it's hot and sunny out, this is going to be a pretty brutal climb for you. Then you'll get to this unnamed pass, continue down the other side of it to the head of this valley. And then this is another part that we had to bypass when I did this hike, because there's too much snow up on this Frog Peak area. We chose to take the Hidden Lake Trail all the way to Hidden Lake and then wrap around and meet up with the main route over here. But the Hidden Lake Trail is another one of those trails that has been completely destroyed by the fire. You can't even find the intersection with the trail here because the trail is just gone. It hasn't been maintained in a long time. And the only reason I knew where the intersection was because I was on it on the GPS. We basically bushwhacked from here all the way to Hidden Lake, and this is just a terrible burn area. There's hundreds of blowdowns everywhere, and the brush is really thick. And it basically took us half a day to get from here to Hidden Lake. It just sucked. There's no good way to put it, and I wouldn't recommend that anybody take that way. Even with there being a bunch of snow up here, that might have been easier. So hopefully you're doing this route at a smarter time, like mid-July through early September, sometime in there, and then this should be no problem. You'll get some really good views up here too. So continue on the Frog Peak Trail, climb up and over this pass, and come down to Frog Lake. And this should be a really good place to camp too. From Big Sand Lake to Frog Lake is about 4.5 miles. And it looks like this is a little bit of a burn area too, but it definitely can't be worse than what we went through down here. So if you can't find the trail after Frog Lake, just continue up the ridge right up to Frog Peak, which is right up here. And it looks like the trail, at least on the map, the trail kind of wraps around under the ridge line. But it basically parallels the ridge line just a few hundred feet in elevation lower. And this is another burn area, so it may be hard to follow the trail in here. Just know that you should be following the ridge line. Then you'll pass under Hidden Peak, and there is a side trail going up to the peak from the west side here, so you can take the trail here and then go up to the peak if you want. Otherwise, continue on the ridge. It's kind of a gradual ridge that you'll follow all the way into the unburned forested area, and here you should be able to pick up a trail. When we did the route, we camped at Hidden Lake and then went through this burn area and met up with the trail here. And in here there is a trail, there's some trail signs, so you should be able to pick up the Big Flat Hidden Ridge Trail here. And since this is unburned forest, the trail is in good shape and it's nice and easy to follow. But again, don't get used to it because it only lasts for like a mile. Then once you start going downhill, you're entering another burn area, and the trail can be pretty hard to follow in here. And here you can choose to just bushwhack straight downhill or take your time to try and follow the trail. I think it's generally worth it to take your time and backtrack a little bit and follow what faint traces of a trail there is, instead of just bushwhacking straight downhill. I think it's a little bit less work that way. But you follow that down into this unburned area where you will be able to pick up a nice trail again. And then down here you're going to cross the big flat creek. Now when we did this in mid to late June, this creek was raging. It was deep too, like waist to chest deep in some parts of it, and the water was flowing very fast. It was pretty scary to cross this creek. So hopefully if you're doing this later in the year it won't be so bad, but again, know that you're going to have a fairly deep river ford right here. From the junction with Big Flat Hidden Ridge Trail to the Colt Killed Trail, which is just after this big creek, that's about 3 miles. So then once you're on this Colt Killed Trail, you'll be following that all the way up this valley to the Pack Box Pass. And that's a long and kind of gradual climb up to the pass. It's about 8 miles long. And even though most of this valley has burned, for some reason there is still a pretty good trail in here. So it shouldn't be hard to follow. The hiking for the rest of the trip is going to be pretty straightforward, all the way back to the Big Creek trailhead here. When you get to here, you'll reach a junction with the trail going up to White Sand Lake. We didn't go up there, but that looks like a pretty cool place to camp if you're willing to make the climb. But the main route continues on the Colt Killed Trail all the way up to Pack Box Pass, which is where we camped, and that's an amazing place to camp. You'll see really good sunset and sunrise. Just make sure you fill up on water before you get up there. The Pack Box Creek stops right about here, so you'll want to fill up on water there. Otherwise, if you want a more established campsite next to some water, you can continue down the pass all the way to the Big Creek Lakes. And basically this entire side of the lake is dotted with really nice campsites. Once you get over the pass and start descending downhill, that's where you're going to meet up with some crowds again. Up until now, the trail has been extremely secluded. You'll find a lot of solitude out there. But basically from the pass to the trailhead, that's where 90% of the crowds hang out. From the pass you'll have nice easy hike on very well maintained trail down to the lake. You'll wrap around the lake and cross a little dam over here and descend down into the forest. And once you're in the forest, you'll be on an extremely well maintained and very wide trail. This is going to feel strange after all of the terribly maintained trail that you've been hiking on, but it'll be nice and fast and easy hiking all the way back to the trailhead. And from Pack Box Pass to the trailhead is about 11 miles. Once back at the trailhead, you'll have about an hour and a half drive to get back to your other car parked at Como Lake. You'll pass through a couple towns on the way, and these small towns have some really good bars and restaurants to stop at on the way back.